Hey everyone, before we get started into this next episode, I want to make sure to remind everyone that if you haven't yet, you should be giving a listen to the other really awesome shows on the Extreme Performance Outdoor Network that I'm now a part of. If you haven't had a chance to yet, search Extreme with an X at the beginning, Performance Outdoor Network on whichever major streaming platform that you listen to these on, and check out the other really cool shows that are a part of the network. There's a lot of great information on them, and they're really entertaining. I'm also really proud to be a part of this network because of their constant efforts to give back to the houndsmen and hunting communities and support the rights of houndsmen and hunters. For example, the United Houndsmen of Colorado effort and others. It's been really nice to be able to be a part of something that also gives back as well. So if you haven't had a chance to check out these other shows and support the network, you should do so. There's a lot of good stuff on them. And now, on to this next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
The folks down below started getting excited and they were yelling and they were saying there's an adult here. And I looked in the branch and the youngster is in the same tree I'm in. The adult now is in the same tree I'm in. And she's holding a sloth. She brought a sloth in and she's holding that in her foot and she's really close to me. She's maybe, 30 feet from me. And what struck me is I didn't realize how white their chest is just snow white. And she was so striking in all that green, being up in the canopy and in that tree. And she was just giving me the evil eye and staring at me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. And this will be the first episode that you'll hear of several different Wyoming falconers that I was able to record while I was still working in Wyoming earlier this year. I'll be mixing in these episodes as part of the rotation here, and I want to thank Jeff and Lauren Reddig for their help in putting this series together, and of course our guest for this episode, Brian Mutch, for helping to get some of the other guests on as well. And I really enjoyed recording this episode with Brian and hearing about all of his different stories. He is one of the guys that has worked for the Peregrine Fund for a very long time and has gotten to travel the world researching all these different amazing species of raptors and also practicing some pretty efficient personal falconry as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to this conversation with Brian Mutch because, well, I can't really do any justice by describing any of this stuff. You just have to hear it for yourself. So enjoy, and here we go. Well, awesome, Brian. I'm really happy that we were able to work this week out, and I guess as much as it, pains me sometimes, I also have to give credit where credit is due, and I guess I have to thank Jeff out, for helping organize this and stuff, put this stuff together as well. But yeah, thanks for taking time out of your week and doing this and helping talk to some of the other guys and getting this organized as well, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great to see you, John, and happy to do it. It's kind of fun to think back on all the years and tell a story. Yeah. And that's, like I said, it's always fun, like seeing all these different people from all of these different walks of life and just sharing this for whatever reason. Falconry has just been this thing that I would have never expected to open so many like social doors, but I've been really surprised and pleasantly surprised and humbled by the fact that, we're some of the most hospitable and helping, communities. For sure.
So
man, when I was a kid running around, my brother and I had crashed for a day or a week on somebody's couch and that had good hawking, and it was just a hospitable family kind of organization, and you were welcome, So yeah, that's continued on, and that's nice.
Very much so. And yeah, I hope that whenever people come through my neck of the woods, I'm hoping to start paying it forward at some point. I always tell people if they want to come through Southern Indiana, I don't know why they would, but if they ever wanted to come through and hang out and come hunting and everything else, that they're more than welcome. And I would feel kind of kind of slimy if I didn't return the favor. You know what I mean? So,
absolutely. No, it's always been a social passion. So it's nice to have your friends around and meet new people.
Yeah. And it's weird too, for as social of a passion as it is for a lot of people, it's still such an introverted and kind of individualistic sport though too. It's kind of a weird paradigm.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've got a hermit side of me that, my friends in town here, like, God, you're in town? Have you been here for a month? And just hawking and working and doing that sort of thing. But yeah, you can get lost in the world of it all too. So
for sure. Well, and it was kind of neat seeing your house and stuff last night for a little bit. I was instantly kind of there's already able to relate to you a little bit because we're both addicted and to this weird hobby of, I wouldn't even say weird, but I oftentimes at least expensive hobby of collecting original art and things like that. And I was really kind of drooling at some of what you have around your house and instantly envious. And of course the devil on the one shoulder was like, just go ahead and take the chance. He won't notice that one Ellis is gone and stuff. But anyway, yeah. I mean, how long have you been? Have you pretty much always really been a fan of that your whole falconry career as well, or
not really? I mean, art, it mattered, but I met Pete Widener as a young person. And Pete was really into art. He really has some spectacular art, and it became a thing that it mattered. And having that stuff that somebody literally worked on and put time into, and of course it's about our passion. It's neat seeing what those people can do on a canvas with paint. The wood carving, kind of one of a kind. A guy from Maine did that. But it's neat to have the art, the dogs, the falcons. It's such a huge part of our lives that it's neat to represent it on the walls as well. And I guess, but yeah, Pete has some wonderful art, and I think that's really stirred my brother and I. Like, wow, this is amazing, and it left a mark.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of weird. There's this weird trigger in our brain that's like, you can have all the pictures on your phone and all of these different, just the normal like things that you can kind of remember and have your memories with and stuff like that. But there's something weird that triggers in our brain that thinks that if that picture was just like painted by somebody else and then hung on our wall, that it's that much more special.
Sure. Yeah.
It's strange for whatever reason. I think I know for me, it's more of, I know the degree of skill and ability and patience that goes behind creating those.
You bet.
For me, and I think that's part of the appeal for it in me. But.
Sure. No, I'm such a non-artist. I really appreciate people who can have an eye for that and taxidermy as well. My brother, he's an artist, and my dad kind of was, and my sister kind of had some art talent, and I got none. So I really appreciate it. But, my brother he's an amazing taxidermist and really has an eye to make a bird look lifelike, which, that's what it's all about. And, but yeah, no, it's neat to have. And I always wanted something, a commission, of one of my animals or several of them, and never actually pulled that off, but I guess there's time.
Yeah. Well, and it's always kind of flattering too. I mean, I've had a couple of friends that have seen a couple of my pictures and were inspired to do a painting. They don't have really any kind of wildlife experience as far as art goes, but they wanted to just try their hand at it, delve into it, and then afterwards were nice enough to give me the paintings afterwards and everything. And I was just like, there's something about that too. It's really humbling. And anytime that I think anybody thinks that you're doing something that's a worthwhile endeavor enough that they're inspired to then in turn do something else from that, it's always pretty cool too.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah. But, so, I mean, out of curiosity, I'm sure you've been asked this before, which of those paintings, what of those is your favorite? I mean, this is one of those cliche questions, but I'm always curious. I mean, there's always seems to be one that kind of has your heart a little bit more than others.
The black jerkin was given to me by Ruth, who at the time was not my wife, and she became my wife, and we've since parted ways, but that was a gift from her. Really pretty amazing. I think it was done. It's a wild scene. It's not a falconry scene. The bird is on a ptarmigan in the Arctic, but it was done from images of my black jerkin tar baby, which was a really special bird in my life. And that was the first I think it was the first original piece of art I ever got. And it was, I think, 1999, something like that, 2000. That meant a lot. The wood carving was pretty neat. When we built a neat house, Ruth and I in Sheridan, on a really amazing piece of land that we bought from Pete Widener. And we wanted that when someone walked to our house, wow, these are falconers. That was going to go on the door, the big front entry door. And so I worked with an artist in Maine, and he produced that falconry scene on that cherry wood and carved that amazing falcons and grouse and the Montana Eastern Front mountain range. And that was neat working with him. That was the only time I've really, truly worked with an artist. And he'd send a drawing and I'd okay it or change a little bit. I had an artist happen to be in town once, and he goes, "No, he's got that tail all wrong. Let's erase that and I'll make it better." And he was real open to that. And then he produced that. His name's John Bryan. And when I called him, he said, "Wow, this is exciting for me." He said, "I've always wanted to do a falconry scene." And, the time, he doesn't just do something for fun. It takes so much time. That was his first that he had ever done, and since then he's done, I think, some for some Arabs and some falconry scenes. But that was fun. That was a neat process.
Yeah, well, it is an amazing piece too, by the way.
Yeah.
I know that everybody listening to this isn't going to be able to appreciate what we're talking about, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah, well, hopefully it'll wind up in the archives, so that's my plan for it, so someone can enjoy it. Yeah,
exactly. It'll wind up in my basement and then in the archives. You're absolutely correct. Yeah. No, I'm glad that we agree on that. I like I said, I admire anybody that has that. I mean, the artistic side of me, of course, is a little bit of the music side, stuff like that. But I mean, I'm like, I can draw stick figures. That's about it, right?
So, yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Yeah, I mean, actually, my kid, surprisingly enough, he's kind of felt like he's kind of got a little bit of that. I mean, he has done some stuff. I mean, I could definitely tell what it was. Yeah. I was kind of actually surprised. I was like, dude, you at the age of like 6, he was already drawing some things that there was like no way in hell I was going to, someone could have had a gun to my head and I wouldn't have been able to produce.
Well, you might want to encourage that. That could be a neat thing to have.
Yeah. He came down and told me the other day, he was like, I really, I think I'm going to start doing this for fun. So I'm like, go for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, it's cool that you've got other things and that you are kind of a fan of in the sport. And I mean, like I of course myself and other people I know as well have got bitten by the falconry book bug and collecting that kind of stuff as well.
Sure.
But it's just it doesn't matter what you're doing. There's all these just rabbit holes you can fall down.
There seems to be no end.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, so as far as some of the other aspects of things that you're involved with, before we kind of talk about how you initially got into falconry and all that other good stuff, why don't you just go ahead and talk a little bit about what your involvement is with like the Peregrine Fund and things like that, so people can kind of understand what your background is a little bit.
You bet. I mean, it goes back to falconry, and I was seeing things the Peregrine Fund was doing. My brother and I had a strong interest in birds of prey and bird hunting. My dad had dogs and bird hunted. So we really, somehow we got into raptors, but we heard about the Peregrine Fund, and they were becoming a force in the West, and at that point they were in Fort Collins, Colorado. They were doing the peregrine recovery throughout the mountain states. There were about 7 different states that they were beginning to work in. And I saw news articles. I saw something in Montana Outdoors. Ralph Rogers and his entire family did the first peregrine hack site in the state of Montana. I think it was about 79 or 80 or 81. It was in the Red Rock Valley, Centennial Valley, south of Dillon, Montana. Anyway, I mean, I was very passionate about peregrines, and that's not waned a bit. I was rabid about peregrine falcons, wanted to be around them. I wanted to be near them. I wanted to have one someday. And so through falconers, eventually that I met, I got to the president of the Peregrine Fund. We went on a falconry trip together. Pete Jenny, Pete Widener, and Bill Burnham and I, we met, drove down to Fort Collins, picked up Bill Burnham, and went on to eastern New Mexico. Actually, we went to a NAFA meet, which was in Amarillo that year. And then from there, we went and finished another week hunting lesser prairie chickens in eastern New Mexico. And Bill Burnham was there, and we talked a lot. I actually stayed with him in his wall tent. So one of my childhood heroes, and I'm with him on a grouse hunting trip. And so that was really, and Jim Weaver was there, and I got to meet Jim Weaver. And so I really met many of my childhood heroes that I had read about and seen in journals and hawk chalks and books. And so eventually I bothered them, and they said, well, you need to be 18 to work for us. When I first started bothering them, I was about 16. I think I got busy doing something else in between there. I worked for Pete Widener on his ranch for a number of years. And then I think in 1985, I did a peregrine survey in southern Utah. There was some peregrines beginning to return and nest in that part of the world. One of our board members, Jim Enderson, I think he was a founding board member of the Peregrine Fund. But he picked up some of these contracts and did survey work and found peregrines and surveyed the nesting birds that were returning. And so I worked for him one summer and with a crew of people. It was a helicopter survey, and they'd dump us off for a night, and then we'd sit on a big cliff and spend the day and watch. And then the helicopter would come the next day and pick us up and move us on. So pretty cool. I was a young person. I think at that point I was about 20 or 21. When I left that job, I literally was getting my first peregrine. I drove nonstop from southern Utah to Rathdrum, Idaho. Kenny Sterner had produced 3 peregrines that Gerald Geiger in Missoula had sent semen over on the bus. Kenny to AI his female Peel's peregrine and made some birds. And he said, look, if one of these is a female, you can have it. So that was a neat end of that trip, that first time I worked for the Peregrine Fund. But anyway, went on. I think I had applied for some other jobs in between there in Alaska, and actually got a job. And with Skip Ambrose, I was going to survey one of the rivers. I think it was the Porcupine River. It was floating rivers in a national park, and doing some raptor surveys, which I was really excited about. And at that point, Pete Jenny was fully on board with the Peregrine Fund, and he had projects he was the director of, one of which was the Aplomado recovery effort. And he needed help in Mexico taking what would be the founders, the breeders. We had permits to take some birds from Mexico, and he wanted me to do that. And he said, and at the conclusion of that, Bill Heinrich will hire you to supervise our peregrine recovery effort, visiting hack sites, setting hack sites up, all those sorts of things with 3 other folks that were doing that. One of which was Dan O'Brien and some other folks, and Jim Wilmarth, some pretty neat folks. And anyway, that was the beginning. That was 1988. And then since then on, I'd never have not worked for the Peregrine Fund. I worked seasonally for 5 years doing the peregrine recovery. Finally graduated from college. Bill Burnham said, look, if you ever graduate from college, we will hire you full time. And so that was a pretty good incentive to finally get out of college. And I did, and then went to work full time, I think in 1993. And I've done neat stuff. It's been a wonderful organization to work for, and fantastic people, the staff. I work with Paul Juergens. He's a falconer. Chris Parrish, the new CEO, I've known him for a long, long time. He was a super guy, and as are many of the staff. It's really grown a lot. When I started, I think there was 15 or 16 people. Now there's about 70, working all over the world. But I got to do some of the most amazing things. The Alplamato program, the Peregrine recovery. I worked on the harpy eagle release sites and trapped wild harpies in the jungle. Did orange-breasted falcon release work. And worked in the Arctic, worked in northwest Greenland for 7 or 8 field seasons with gyrfalcons and peregrines. And I'll never forget flying to Greenland for the first time. I was in a C-130, the Schenectady, New York, the 109th Air National Guard provides their aircraft for scientific research in the Arctic. In the summertime, they're in the Greenland Arctic, and in the winter they're in Antarctica, but they are supporting scientific research. And so they were our ride to Greenland, and it was so cool flying in this plane with all these military guys, and we'd fly to a little town called Kangerlussuaq, which is it's right on the Arctic Circle, I think. And Thule, where we're winding up going, is way, way north of the Arctic Circle. It's about the 78th or 79th parallel, so it's way up north. And but I'll never forget, flying over that and looking out the window of that plane and seeing these places that as a kid I dreamed about. And you read stories about King Frederick and expeditions to go to Greenland and take gyrfalcons. And here I was getting to go to Greenland and with the intent of trapping gyrs, studying gyrs, banding gyrs, going into eyries, and getting my hands on these amazing white birds. So yeah, unbelievable what it's allowed me to do. I've been employed by them for 35 years now, so I've got to see a lot of neat stuff. Watching peregrines and gyrfalcons hunt, it's really opened my eyes to what those birds are capable of. And I've had some good falconry birds in my life, and at best they're fallen far short of the mark of what a wild bird is capable of. But it's neat to strive for that sort of excellence and the mental fitness and the physical fitness, and at least get to some degree of what a wild bird can do. And it's a kind of a bar you set that you try and get there, and you never will, but we can't duplicate what a wild bird goes through, but we can fly pretty spectacular birds, and I think that's the best we can do, and we can challenge them, and we can strive for that kind of excellence, and a lot of people are.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's pretty incredible. I mean, you've definitely done some stuff. Yeah. I mean, like I said, they're pretty much a life like that for the most part, I think, is what, at least subliminally, if nothing else, a lot of falconers kind of dream about or wish for. So that's pretty cool that you got to, do a lot of those things, and especially on somebody else's dime. That's, you can't ever beat that. No. And I mean, getting paid to do some of these really cool things is pretty, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, so. Falconry opened those doors, and it was really that, the passion for falconry and the know-how to handle birds and trap birds and know what you're looking at, and the climbing. I mean, a lot of people they're not comfortable with the climbing and going over cliffs and climbing big jungle trees. And my dad was a really good climber, and he taught a climbing class. And so I learned all that kind of stuff as a young person, and it came pretty natural. I mean, I did it from such a young person. I was maybe too comfortable in some situations, but it opened a lot of doors, and falconry was certainly the driving force in my life what am I going to do? This is, what am I good at? And not very much, but I sure love falcons, and that opened some really interesting doors for employment with an amazing organization. So,
well, and I mean, whenever you finally did graduate, I mean, out of curiosity, were people taking bets on whether or not you ever would or something?
Sure. Yeah. No, I think it took me about 9 years to get a 4-year degree. Yeah. The first thing that happened that was a disaster for college was when I was 18 years old. I'd flown a falcon. My brother, we got a prairie falcon, but he got a job in Alaska that summer, and he was 2 years older than me. So I was like 16 and he was 18, and he was getting his first falcon, and she was a captive raised bird. A guy in Montana molted a couple birds together, and they bred, and they raised some young, and it wasn't even legal in Montana then. The Fish and Game said, well, just let's permit these birds. They're just prairie falcons. I'm sure you can find homes for them. Well, we got one of those, and so Dale left for Alaska, and and I flew her while he was gone and started her and trained her, and then he returned in early September, and then she was kind of the bird. He flew her, I flew her. When one had time, the other flew her or whatever, and so she got a lot of attention. We had initially we had a black lab is all we had, but we always wanted an English setter because we met a falconer who had one, and really fell in love with that breed and those dogs. And it's just what we saw in the beginning, so that's what we felt we probably had to have. If quickly in that bird's life, we did get an English setter. We rescued her from the dog pound, and she became one of the premier setters we've ever had, which is pretty neat. But anyway, at 18, when I was ready to legally could get a falcon, Dale and I had just returned from the NAFA meet, which at that time was in Brigham City, Utah. It was 1982. We went to that meet and were blown away. I mean, we met a lot of people that we had read about and heard about, and saw a lot of falcons, white gyrfalcons. Those were the first, really fancy birds that we'd ever laid our. Well, we'd seen a few. Pete Jenny lived in Missoula a while, and Pete Widener, and we'd seen as very young people had actually met them there, and they had some pretty neat, pretty fancy birds. But yeah, that meet was an eye opener. And anyway, when Dale and I drove home, we drove north of Missoula up to this valley that we'd go on the weekends. It was a spectacular valley to hunt pheasant, partridge, had a lot of gray partridge, had a lot of waterfowl. Well, we wound up catching a passage gyrfalcon. And so Dale said, well, she's yours. I mean, you need a falcon. So, I mean, here's this bird, I wanted a peregrine. I didn't know how I was going to get one of those. Captive breeding wasn't a big deal then. There was a few guys that had them. Pete Widener had them, was just getting started. Dave Jameson and Steve Baptiste had them. Les Boyd had a few, but in Peregrine Fund had a lot, but they were for recovery. And so wound up, getting this bird that was supposed to be unapproachable, a gyrfalcon and a passage gyrfalcon. And so we trapped that bird this one evening, late in the evening, and Dale actually tied the harness. I drove, and he tied a harness while we drove up there because I needed a falcon. I'm like, well, I'll trap a prairie falcon or something. We had hoods for a prairie falcon. We didn't even have a hood for a gyrfalcon. So we catch this bird, and I've never been so excited about anything in my life. We're watching that bird on a pigeon with binoculars in this cornfield, and she's plucking and she's nervous, and it's getting late in the evening, and we'd bumped her a few times and she wasn't caught. I don't think we're going to get her. And then finally, I mean, she's getting a big crop, and there's nothing left of that pigeon. I hope she's caught, or we're probably not going to get her. And I walk over the fence, and she takes a flight, and she's caught. And I'll never forget, I didn't walk, I ran up to her and probably set the training back a month, tackled her and had her. And Dale and I, man, I mean, he drove, and I held that big passage female gyr all the way home, unhooded, in our car for an hour. And then when we got home, we got to get a hood for a gyr tonight. And I said, well, there's this guy named Gerald Geiger, and we'd met him, but barely. And so we wound Dale, you hold her, I'm going to go and talk to Gerald. And so Gerald gives me this wonderful gyrfalcon hood and fit her perfect. And then that sort of sealed a relationship with Gerald because he was really tight with Pete Jenny and Pete Widener and some other guys. And all those people had left. They'd gone on, and Gerald was still in Missoula doing his thing, still flying birds. And now he had Dale and I around, and so we became pretty tight. And he goes, do you want to go up to the Nine Pipes and see if we can see another gyr and trap a gyr or look around? And I said, yeah, for sure. And so we started doing a lot of things together. But boy, catching that gyrfalcon though, I was supposed to be in school, and I pretty much quit when I got her. And then I made the mistake of enrolling for the Missoula school system. Then University of Montana was on the quarter system, and basically I flunked out the fall quarter. I re-enrolled in the winter quarter and basically flunked out of the winter quarter. And then they suspended me for a year, and I said, "Good, I'll give me more time to fly this bird properly." And I don't want. And we had discovered grouse then. My dad had taken us prior to that to the east side of Montana, over near Shoto and Augusta. It was about a 2.5-hour drive, and when we laid our eyes on that country, it changed our world. Missoula, if you're not familiar with Missoula, it's in western Montana, and it's forested and it's mountains. And Missoula is a big valley, it's a hub of 5 valleys, big rivers. It's a beautiful place, but it's not really. It was good then. I'm glad I grew up when I did in Missoula. It didn't have a lot of room to grow and maintain those open spaces where we were flying our birds. But of course, it did grow like everything else is. And so now today, those spaces are gone. I was just there a week or two ago looking around, and wow, you could not fly a falcon here today. But there were a lot of partridge, there were a lot of pheasant, and there was some pretty good duck hawking. There was a spring creek and that I had kind of sole permission on. They liked the falconry, and so I had this neat creek that never froze, and the colder it got, the better it got. And so that was pretty neat. And then we had good hawking. We had 2 locations, the Blackfoot Valley, which was near Ovando, which was a real high mountain valley with ponds. It was duck hawking. And then there was the Flathead Valley where we caught the gyrfalcon, and that had a lot of upland game, incredible pheasant numbers and partridge and waterfowl. And so we had pretty good stuff, pretty close. But whenever we could, we'd go to the east side for grouse. And that bird, that gyr, in her second season with me, I caught the first grouse I've ever caught with her, a sharp tail over there near Shoto. But yeah, she did my schooling no favors, and I pecked away at it over the years, went back and forth and worked for the Peregrine Fund, and then I'd take a semester off to do something really cool with them until finally Bill said, "Look, we're keeping you from graduating. No more. You can work for us in the summer until you graduate, and then we'll hire you." So anyway, I'm glad it's behind me. I'm glad I did get through it, and it wasn't that bad, but once I decided there was, something at the end of the tunnel that was worth getting out of school for. And
yeah. Well, it's kind of funny that it was a little bit of a paradox for you. The falconry was the reason you were going to school, but also not going to school. Yeah. And that's pretty funny. Yeah. Well, I'm glad they finally put their foot down and basically made your then undisciplined self go ahead and just bite the bullet and finish.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my parents had something to do with that too. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was really smart and breezed through school. And she said, you can do this. And that person mattered in my life. And she was a Missoula girl and pretty interesting life she's lived. But so, yeah, I need to do it. And if she says I can do it, I think I can. And all the classes I was worried about, she said, "No, I know you'll get through statistics. Biology has a lot of, it's almost like pre-med stuff. There's a lot of math, there's a lot of chemistry, and the biology courses, they're not as easy. Just because you know something about falconry doesn't mean you can pass ornithology. It's a really difficult course." And
sure.
Yeah, but it, it didn't come easy for me. My brother's, it came easy from him. Yeah, I'm just going to read my notes before the test and go with what I know. Really?
I get it. Getting into the medical field and stuff all those years ago, I can remember, of course, it's not usually generally a good idea to take anatomy, physiology, chemistry, and all those classes along with your core major classes too. Yeah. I still remember having to take all my respiratory classes along with all those other classes and stuff. And don't ever do that. Anybody listening that's thinking about doing that, don't do it. It's terrible. Just get your 2 years of prereqs and other stuff out of the way first, and just do, if that's the route you want to go. But I think everybody's experiences with all that are different, but I'm glad it ended up working out for you in the end. And I mean, was there any other aspect of biology or working as a biologist that did you work anywhere else in that field during all the time that you've been doing it, or was it pretty much always for the Peregrine Fund?
Pretty much the Peregrine Fund. I mean, thinking back, that's pretty much it. I mean, I worked for Pete Widener he had a cattle ranch here in Sheridan. He had falcons. That was my interest, was his falcons. And we did we helped him with, the breeding. He got to hatch eggs. We learned a lot about captive propagation. We were around the falcons, but we were also here, in the winter. I mean, we helped him calve. And so that's a winter thing. And by God, it didn't matter what was going on the ranch. At 3:30 we went hawking, and Dale was my brother, was working for Pete then too, and Pete came and found us and go get your birds, and we're going hunting, and that was every day of the season, and then we'd stay through the summer, and there was irrigating and haying and just everything, but it was neat. And then later in life, having some property, Ruth had means way beyond me. And so we really had some neat property which was wonderful. That was another lifetime dream, was owning land to manage for birds and for hunting. And we had about 700 acres. They were separated by about a mile. Which was kind of nice because it was easy to let one rest and, hunt here a day or two. And that other 300 acres was just being rested, and those birds weren't even seeing me or my truck or my dogs or my falcons, and so that was really neat. And man, I planted food plots and shelter belts and burned. I didn't use cattle. I didn't have cattle for managing the grasslands. I burned. I used fire, and so that was the dream come true. I mean, having land, and you literally walk out, and it's amazing how well game birds like pheasant and sharp-tailed grouse respond to management and favorable habitat. It's everything. I mean, habitat is everything, and I mean, even in a worst-case scenario, just not abusing it and not even really needing to manage it. But if this place looks better than the neighbor's place, I would have all of their grouse too, or pheasant, and they would spend more and more time on me. But on top of that, I did plant food plots. I had wheat, and I had, Pheasants Forever winter survival mix of things, of various things, and planted Russian olives and berry bushes, and anyway, it was really neat to have, and probably spoiled me for life, to be able to walk out your door and just let a falcon go, and then walk probably within 2 or 3 minutes and get a point on grouse or pheasant or something. But that was neat, having the land and something to manage. And especially in this world, Sheridan it's difficult. It's all private. There's very little public land here. There's some state chunks here and there that has some game. Pete's been really good and had success getting permission on some of the private land, and he's done well. Pete Jenny, getting on lots of land, and I'm going to have to do that in the future.
or just move.
Yeah, or move. I always thought I'd move back to Montana, when I retire, and I might. It still feels like home, and I know it better. It has a little more to offer. Wyoming has lots of sage grouse, and in locations it does have pretty good sharptail. But Sheridan is really good sharptail country, but it's not really good sharptail grouse hawking country. It's pretty rolly, a lot of brushy draws. There are locations that are wonderful, but as a whole, there's probably more sharptail country that isn't. You're like, that's not probably real conducive to falconry. It's too close to cover. It's hilly. It's steep. It's whatever. But it's a beautiful place. It's for a place that has grouse. It's the least windy city I've ever lived in. I mean, it's amazing how non-windy the systems kind of change with a vengeance, but then it's just day after day after day. It's really nice, and boy, that's not the case in a lot of places I go in Montana.
Yeah, well, or the rest of Wyoming.
Or lots of Wyoming.
40 to 60 mile per hour winds every other day, and
exactly. No, that's a factor, and that we all think about. So
for sure. Well, and like so, from an early age, as far as your early beginnings in all of this, I mean, do you think that you still would have still kind of figured out or discovered falconry and ended up getting into it if you didn't already kind of have some of that early exposure?
There, I have no doubt it was because of my brother. I followed his footsteps. I mean, we were tight. We were inseparable. We did everything together. And he got into it, and he was, like I said, he was close to 2 years, not quite 2 years older than me. So when he was about, I think he was 12 or 13, and at that must have been like 1974 or 5. You didn't even there was no test. There wasn't, I think he had this little colored slip of paper that said, from the Fish and Game, that said, you can go take a kestrel. And shortly after that, there was, he had to take the test, like all the falconers that were existing falconers, you had to take the test, and they didn't have to have a sponsor, but anybody new, of course, we're required to go through what we all, go through now. But Dale was kind of right at the end of that period of time. And so he got this kestrel, and it looked really cool to me. I mean, I wanted to do it. And I was young. I was 10 or 11. And I think 2 or 3 years later, he got a second kestrel, and he had it. And at that point, I was about 12 or 13. And our family went up to Flathead Lake, north of Missoula, just for a day in the summertime. Well, Dale and I found a kestrel nest. You could literally just reach in this hole, and we're like pulling these kestrels out. Like, I'm taking one, and I'm just not going to tell my parents about it. And we got halfway home at the end of that day, and it starts peeping for food and calling, and Mom and Dad look in the back seat, and I've got a kestrel. Like, okay, well, you need to do this legally in the future, and do whatever it takes. Well, for one, you had to be 16. And so that was a few years away. So I flew this kestrel for a year or two, and we wound up, I think the female that my brother had and the male that I took, we wound up sort of accidentally wild hacking them back without really knowing what we were doing. After flying them for the fall, they kind of lived in the house in the winter. And then in the spring, we started flying them again, and they'd come and go, and we'd just leave them out for a night. But they'd come back in, and we'd put them in the house. And it was kind of a tame hack but it went on for a month, and finally they quit coming back, or we'd see them and I can't get them back. And they're eating grasshoppers all day out in the fields. And so that's how it started. And then at 16, I took the falconry test, and I got I was going to get a red tail, trap a passage red tail, and my brother had a red tail then. I think he was 18 then, and he had his red tail, and he was going to get a prairie falcon. And so the Fish and Game knew I had passed the test, and they had confiscated some red tail from somebody, and it was at a rehabber's place. And they said, well, why don't we just give him that bird? Which really made me happy, because I got this IS red tail in the summertime, and it was a male, and I had all summer to work with him. And so I flew that bird all summer, and my forestry teacher in high school, really a cool guy, we'd hatched a bunch of pheasant eggs for the class. And that summer he goes, well, the best thing I can think of to do with these pheasant is you use them for your falcons and your red tail. So I had this endless source of pheasant to throw this red tail. And I'd go up on this, there's a little mountain near our house. It was a butte and had cliffs on it. And I'd walk that red tail up there. And I was driven to have that bird catch birds out of the air. And, I wanted a falcon, I wanted a peregrine, but I had a red tail, and that was going to have to do. And somehow I'm going to make him catch birds. We didn't have many rabbits. Missoula had a few. He caught a handful in his life. I flew him 2 years, and he might have caught 4 or 5 rabbits. I had some snowshoe hares, and we flew those, and those were super cool flights. But birds were still really, and we had a lot of birds. I had a lot of pheasant, a lot of ducks, and a lot of partridge. And I threw him, I bet I threw that bird 40 or 50 pheasant that summer. I mean, every day I flew him, he got a pheasant. And I'd put him on this cliff, walk way down below, call him to me, throw a pheasant while he's coming at me, and he'd chase that thing forever, and he caught them all. And so he got really confident that he thought he could just catch birds. And he did. I think the first thing he ever caught was a pheasant. He was up in a tree, and he saw a young bird running in September, and he just kind of did the big red tail stoop and got it on the ground. But I was super happy. That was the first head of game, real head of game I'd ever caught. And he caught some other stuff along that fall. But then that winter, God, we did some neat stuff with him. We were flying, field feeding mallards. And at that point, my brother had that good prairie falcon, and we'd do it with her every once in a while, just cut her loose into thousands of mallards in a wheat field, and she'd catch one every time. And it was pretty chaotic and, but neat and exciting. And so I remember Dale said, well, let's try it with your red tail. And we get up on this uphill side of this great big wheat field, which was right near the Missoula County Airport. It was a great big open field then. And it was a wheat field. And there had to have been thousands of mallards, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 mallards hitting this wheat field. And they're kind of leapfrogging along, and they all land. And we're probably 300 or 400 yards away. And I hold that red tail out the window, and he lays his eyes on that duck's just ball of mallards, and man, off he goes. And he pumps his wings a handful of times, and then he just disappears. And it's late evening, glides. We lose sight of him. And all of a sudden there's this roar of wings and mallard wings taking off, and they go up and they circle around and they go about 300 yards and they all land again. But where they were, there's a bird out there plucking away, and he caught a big drake mallard. And so we repeated that over and over with that red tail, and he caught more mallards, field feeding mallards, than anything else that I caught with him. And then we took it another step. We just didn't know better, but we'd fly him with that prairie falcon. And I tell Dale, I said, okay, mine's a lot slower, so you don't let that prairie falcon go till he's halfway to the ducks. And then we'd let him race out there towards these ducks, and then Dale would unhood his prairie, let her go, and they'd get there about the same time. And same thing. They'd each be sometimes 10 feet apart, 20 feet apart, plucking a mallard. And, they'd sit shoulder to shoulder on the back of an old station wagon, the front seat, this prairie and this red tail. And, I would never suggest someone doing that, but for whatever reason, we got away with it. And we'd buy gas and go in and buy junk food and come out, and the red tail's unhooded, the prairie's hooded, and they're literally sitting shoulder to shoulder. And they did fine, but but crazy, and just didn't know better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could have.
Yeah. But should have been a disaster, yeah. But amazing and that bird went on to catch, he caught some partridge, he caught a lot of pheasant, and he caught a lot of ducks. And then I released him with Dale had a female red tail. We released those two together one spring up in the Flathead Valley, and yeah, I always wondered, hoped that they did well. That's the only hawk I've ever flown. I've always wanted to fly a goshawk, and I never have. And maybe I will someday. But
yeah. I mean, if you're not even retired yet, and you've already managed to accomplish all these other things that you've done, then I'm sure you've got some time. Hopefully,
Yeah, I hope.
It's pretty cool though. I mean, that's a really nice early beginning for you, and I'm sure you probably never looked back and just kind of
it went from there to that gerfalcon pretty quick, and then I got Gerald and Kenny Sterner gave me that first peregrine, so that was exciting. I named her June, and I flew her for 17 years, and she was spectacular. When you're young, it's funny. Hopefully there's an evolution, and there sure was with me, but I thought, I need to just catch a bunch of game. That's what this is about. And it is hunting, and that is important. And they need to have success to truly see the best from the birds we fly. But there's needs to be some class about it too. And maybe that's not the most important thing. A byproduct of a great flying bird probably you're probably going to catch some game.
Sure. Yeah.
But it probably doesn't need to be the driving force in your life. And it was for me with that peregrine as a juvenile. I was like, I just want to catch stuff. I want to kill game. and I want to catch 100 head. And she did. And it was her worst season. I mean, she flew pretty, not pathetic, but she was deadly. But she flew 200-300 feet, maybe sometimes a little better than that, but very efficient and very deadly. And thankfully, I remember at that point in my falconry career, I was like mad. I was standing in the middle of a pond up to, here in water. There was one green-winged teal I'm trying to flush. My peregrine is sitting on the dike. And it's that pathetic. This has gotten there. And I'm probably screaming at her and the duck. And then I just took a big step back and said, no, this needs to change. If someone saw this is embarrassing. And so, that really changed the next year with that bird. I was like, you're going to make this bird really fly good. I had seen some falconers' birds fly and saw what they could truly do, what a falcon should be doing in my mind, and that was neat to see. I saw Chris Merker fly a black jerkin on sharp-tailed grouse in Shoto, and that bird climbed until it was a black dot in the sky, and watching it come down on these sharp-tailed grouse over his setter on point, that was a changing point for me. And another guy in Missoula, even younger, he had a Peregrine Prairie from Les Boyd who was flying a tiercel. Really a classy guy, and he had a great English setter. And we got to see that bird fly partridge. Like, okay, that's what we need to strive for. And it changed my whole way of thinking. And then I met Pete Widener and Pete Jenny and Dan Conkle and many, many other falconers that were great falconers, and saw what they were doing with birds. And I corrected all that I'd done with June in her first season. And from her second season on to her 17th season, she was spectacular. She kind of corrected the lack of pitch and everything about her. She was always a killer, but it was neat to be able to still take that and turn her into something you'd be even more proud of. And yeah, I think the evolution is just, a good flying bird, you're probably going to catch game if that's important, and it is, but shouldn't be the most important thing. I think, I love now, I've even taken that further. When my birds start to become pretty successful, I challenge them and try and just make them fly better and harder. And I want to see kind of push that envelope even more. And I think I have a good system. I haven't had to use a drone, or I've never used that yet. I probably will have to someday, but if I have game, I'll make a high flying female peregrine, and I have no doubt. But game's a big piece of that puzzle.
Well, yeah, because that's ultimately what falconry is pursuit of game.
Absolutely.
And like you said, if you're doing it like you should be doing it, the byproduct is going to be some degree of numbers, one way or the other. Your own personal standards on that, or your own personal standards on that. But yeah, otherwise you're just flying a bird. You're not really doing falconry.
Sure.
But yeah, and that's always important to emphasize, especially for people that listen to these kind of things or trying to do their early research and stuff. It's important to know that is what makes falconry in a nutshell. But,
we all evolve too, and what's important for one might be a little different for another, and
sure.
And the different birds. I've really been stuck with falcons. It's kind of what I have quarry for, and where I live, it's easier for me to fly a long wing at quarry than it is and a big long wing. I love the thought of Merlins, and I love tiercel peregrines, and I'll continue to fly tiercel peregrines. They're such a wonderful bird. And right now in my life, I miss gyrfalcons, but right now in my life, I think peregrines can do what I'm doing probably better. Mm-hmm. I'd like to think there'll be another gyrfalcon in my life again, but no, I think the quarry you have, the area you live in, that kind of decides the bird probably you should have, and the quarry you pursue. We're all singing the blues with quarry. You can go to good places and certainly find pretty good numbers, but having local hawking is so important. To be able to get off work and go out and produce for your bird. And in my lifetime, that was never an issue for many, many years of it. The fancy falcons were the issue. It's like, where am I going to get a peregrine or a gyrfalcon or a hybrid or a prairie? And then the game was never a factor.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a given. And so I feel lucky to have seen that.
Yeah, I mean, going back to that whole paradox issue we were talking about earlier. I mean, that's one thing that gets brought up all the time between falconers is you know, back in the decades ago, it was so easy to get into game, but it was so hard to actually get birds and everything else. And now it's never been easier to get a bird, but like land access and quarry is what's hard now.
It's the challenge you got.
I think it's probably I think if most people were being honest or were asked, I mean, probably more people would rather have the the former than the latter.
I would.
But I mean, I kind of want to hold that thought and come back to that.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I do want to ask you a little bit more about some of these really incredible experiences that you had getting a chance to deal with so many different places and different birds. And I mean, curiosity. I mean, any time I talk to people that have dealt with like harpies and these different kinds of falcons and stuff, curiosity always gets the best of me. I always want to find out more, like, specifically regarding, like, say, your experience researching, the harpies and stuff. I mean, I'm sure that there's probably some experiences or one or two in particular that you can recall that stick out in your mind as far as, like when you're doing these. I mean, so what was one of your more memorable, like, experiences doing some of these different projects? And you can go through a couple of them if you don't mind, because I'm curious.
Well, with the Harpy Eagle program, we were releasing some birds. We were captively producing some eagles. We were releasing them into the jungle in Panama, but we had somebody doing some research on wild birds, monitoring nests, trying to understand, what this bird needed so that we knew, about protecting. What do they need? What does a harpy eagle, his life history, its home range look like? Everything being done was going to be pretty new, because most of the tropical raptors are very little known about them. They're a hard bird to study because they're difficult to see and to find. Anyway, we went down to try and trap some birds and put GPS satellite telemetry on them, and to learn some of this data. We had a PhD student and a full-time employee doing the research. And so I went down as a climber. I was going to draw some blood and pull the blood. And so I had, this little traveling lab to take into the jungle. I had a container of liquid nitrogen. I had a centrifuge to spin the blood down. And we wanted to learn some about vitamin too for our own, the captive flock, what to get them on a better diet. Anyway, we got to this, and amazing to get there. I mean, we literally went by, I flew to Panama, and then we flew closer towards Colombia, but not quite on the Colombia border, but we were in the Darien, which is a big expanse of forest, native sort of huge forest that's been left. And so we flew deeper into that part of the world in my plane, and then we took dugout canoes up this river, which was huge in the beginning, and at the end it was like you could jump across these channels of it. And then from there we got to some Indian village in the middle of nowhere and packed on horses and went as far as the horses could go. And then we walked, and I'm never going to see home again, ever. If I had to get out of here on my own, it would never happen. And we had guides taking us back to this harpy eagle nest. And anyway, we were setting a trap, and the parents put a lot of care into the young. They feed them for a year and a half, 2 years after they have fledged. And the young is pretty noisy. They're always calling. The adults avoid them because they're aggressive, and they come flying in with food, and they leave food. So the trap that they use to catch them it's this wire, kind of, it's like looks like a part of a tennis racket that you would hit the tennis ball with, but it's wire, and it has a reinforced boundary, and it's got these little wires that hold a lasso, sort of fine cord around. You put a dead animal, a chicken or something, in the middle of that, and the idea is we're trying to catch the young birds, not the adults, and that this young, we'll get as close as we can to that young bird. got to shoot a line up into these massive trees. They're huge. I mean, they're 180, 200 feet tall. And we'd shoot a line up in there with a crossbow and then pull a bigger cord over with the arrow that would fall with a weighted arrow with a line. We'd pull a bigger line over, and then we'd get a climbing rope pulled up and over a big limb. And then we'd climb up into this canopy and set this trap, come down. Well, I was up there once, and the first thing was, I mean, these are emergent trees, so they stick up above often the rest of the forest canopy. And I never forget it. I got up in there, I never even thought about that, but I got up in this tree, and I'm on branches that are 3 or 4 feet, in diameter, and these are just branches, and I'm standing on them. I would have felt comfortable enough to literally unclip from the rope. They were so big, and it's like being on a sidewalk almost. And I looked out. I was way above the canopy, and it was really nice. It was early in the morning, and it was a sunrise, and that green of that canopy as far as you could see, and it was blowing in the wind, and it literally looked like an ocean with green waves, and then looking out as far as I could see, and it was an amazing. I've never seen anything like that, and been in the jungle quite like that. And so that was really cool. And anyway, the folks down below started getting excited, and they were yelling, and they were saying that there's an adult here. And I look in the branch, and the youngster is in the same tree I'm in. The adult now is in the same tree I'm in, and she's holding a sloth. She brought a sloth in, and she's holding that in her foot, and she's really close to me. She's maybe, 30 feet from me. And what struck me is I didn't realize how white their chest is just snow white. And she was so striking in all that green, being up in the canopy and in that tree. And she was just giving me the evil eye and staring at me. And then she flew off into another tree with that. And the young one went after her. Like, well, now it just got fed. It's probably going to be a while before we have any chance of trying to trap this young one. And we did eventually get that. Bird, but man, it was just over and over, climbing and resetting traps and moving traps. And it was exhausting. I mean, it was really hard work in a super, super hot, humid environment.
Yeah, I want to take a nap just listening to all the logistics in that, man. Like I thought it was, puckering enough just climbing a 40 to 45 foot tree to pull a Cooper's hawk, let alone. That's nuts.
Yeah. I have a lot of respect for the people that, do those arboreal studies and surveys when they're just living in the canopy of that forest and pretty comfortable. I mean, there's good ways. We had a really good climber there that taught me more about climbing trees and how to do it easily. And he had a good system with Jumars and then a sort of another ascender that locks between a belly, a waist belt and a chest harness, and it locks in. And it was a neat motion. It was a much easier way than fighting Jumar's way up a rope for, and in the first, 30 feet, you're literally macheting through understory to get through there. And there's hornets and there's bees and there's bad snakes. And so, you're trying to pay attention to everything and stay out of trouble, but it'd be a really bad place to get hurt.
Yeah.
And have a problem. And thankfully we never had anything serious, but so that was it was just neat. The harpy eagle, seeing the wild harpies and the falcons that were there. There were orange-breasted falcons on occasion. There were lots of bat falcons, and watching those hunt and other forests. I mean, there were ornate hawk eagles and things like that. But other neat, really amazing birds of prey that we were getting to see and watch. It's hard. I mean, it's like accipiters. It's a quick glimpse through the jungle. It's just those adults. They'd come and go and be gone in a hurry, and they were only dropping off food. It seemed like. Every 3 or 4 days for that youngster. And that youngster was just always food bagging. They're always hungry, which made them catchable. Eventually you could, typically get them and do what we needed to do. But that was a neat trip there. The tropics are, I'm so much more a temperate region person growing up in Montana. I really love the Peregrine program and being in the Rocky Mountains. I love the Greenland work and getting dropped off up there. Kurt Burnham was doing his PhD on different on gyrfalcons up there, and nest site selection, and all kinds of things, gyrfalcon fledging and movements of the birds, how that, just a massive bunch of data. And I was sort of just the climber, and gladly, and helping with trapping. We trapped some birds and stuff, and I was doing a lot of the trapping. But we had a really nice boat up there, and Kurt measured the inside of a C-130 and got the measurements. And then he had a boat built by Safe Boats in Seattle, which is really a great seaworthy boat, which is a good thing in Greenland. You don't, you really want a great seaworthy boat, because if you go in the water, you're in big trouble. And we really depended on that. We got around by boat or helicopter, and the boat was cheaper because once we bought it and had it there, that was ours. The helicopter we had to charter. And so, we'd be, driving up the coast in the boat, and there was sometimes several of us. Ruth would go, several other Peregrine Fund folks, and there might be a line of cliffs, way off in the distance. And Kurt, we wanted to survey, find all the gyrs, find all the peregrines that we could. And he'd drop me off, and I'd walk miles and miles of cliff, and then he'd pick me up at some predetermined spot way up the ocean for him, and a big walk for me. So, it was like a dream come true kind of job. And it was like turning the clock back, being there. Like, you literally expected a woolly mammoth to come walking across the tundra, and you never saw a person, you never saw a plane contrail, you never heard anything. And it's just neat to know those places exist and are out there. But, and then to be studying and seeing white gyrfalcons and working with those and watching them hunt, man, it's sitting on an eyrie. This bird she had 5 young, super white gyrfalcons. And, so they were pretty busy feeding all these youngsters and watching that jerkin one. And it's like 2 a.m. The sun doesn't even set. That time of year, I'm up there in sort of late June, early July, and it's light all day long, and it's easy to just never quit working. I remember being in a peregrine eyrie once and banding baby peregrines, and God, I feel tired. What time is it? And we've been at this all day, and I look, and it's like 2:30 in the morning. But anyway, watching that white jerkin at that one eyrie, and the dovekies. It's a small little seabird, and they nest in these massive colonies of literally millions. Greenland is sort of feast and famine. Those gyrs must have it really difficult, much of the year. It's not like Alaska, the Arctic in Alaska, it's really rich in quite a few different varieties and species of birds. Greenland, man, those gyrs literally, they have rock ptarmigan, Arctic hares, and that's about 2 things. And that's about it for a lot of period of time. I think, the data showed that some of them wintered out on the ocean and perched on icebergs and lived sort of out at sea as well. But still, things were tough. And when they were on eggs, there wasn't much around. But then when the seabirds come back, it's kind of a smorgasbord for them, and a gravy train. Literally very easy eating. But watching that jerkin just race into these dovekies, and these dovekies are flying out of these valleys. They nest in boulders, like small boulder talus fields in these valleys, and they're on these steep slopes, and they're in those rocks, and that's where they nest. And literally millions. And then they fly way out to sea, and they're feeding on just plankton and different sea life. And so, those gyrfalcons are just raging out after those birds at sea, and, watching them in binoculars, bobbing his head, and he's going to go, and then off he goes. And I watch him disappear in binoculars, and usually within 5 or 6 or 7 minutes, he's coming back with a dovekey and gives it to the female. She comes out, takes it. He goes and gets another one and another one and another one. And man, some of the gyrfalcon eyries I went into, they had those things literally stacked in the eyrie like a cord of wood, for those youngsters to eat, just overfeeding and no problem. So that boy, they took advantage of the good times when, and then there was more species that they ate. There were kittiwakes, which is kind of like a gull. There's some long-tailed ducks up there, and guillemots. There's murres, there's puffins, but all mostly seabirds, things oriented to the sea. Very few birds inland. The only land mass is just around the ocean in Greenland. As you get very far inland at all, it's just ice. It's solid ice, and as deep as 2 miles thick. And so we flew over the ice cap a few times to cut a corner off to get to a fjord to where we knew we had falcons, and we'd fly over some of that ice field in a helicopter, and it was just staggering to see that massive. I mean, from south to North Greenland, I think it's something like 1,600 or 1,700 miles long. It's this massive island, and it's almost all ice, and it's thick ice. So there's and the land mass is just a little bit of land around the perimeter that's near the ocean. So anyway, there's a wheat deer. There's a northern wheat deer. It's kind of like a little sparrow, and the peregrines eat those. Jerkins probably feed on those as well. But other than that, it's seabirds or ptarmigan or hares. We find some big Arctic hare legs in the Giraries as well.
Yeah, I can only imagine just how surreal that must have been, just being able to have that front row seat, sometimes, like you said, until like 2:30 in the morning, just watching these, all these incredible animals just interact with each other. And I mean, I and for me, it's just hard to even comprehend because
it's an amazing place. It's hard to believe it. And I wish I miss it. I have not been back. And we even did some things on the east side. I forget the name of the bay, Disco Bay, I think something like that. But we had a crew, Bill Heinrich and Jim Wilmarth, Kurt Burnham, Bill Burnham. They wanted to trap and try the east coast of Greenland, which was an ordeal to get there and set up this trapping station. They had a neat little cabin that they stayed at. Apparently it was spectacular over there as well. Very different. They got a lot of falcons. They were there in, I think, October or November. So it was winter, and they had really good luck catching quite a few gyrfalcons on that side. But, I mostly worked a little bit at Kangaroo Walk down south, which is where the initial sort of Greenland work studies were done on peregrines by a group long time ago. They did a lot of work, and it was sort of military funded, but they did a lot of neat studies and research on those falcons around that area. But then Bill Burnham really wanted to work way up in northern Greenland, and made that happen. It was we lived on an air base. There's a Thule Air Force Base, and they were given Peregrine Fund was given a barracks. It was wonderful. I mean, it was like we had shops and kitchen and bedrooms, and it was like a research station. And we flew that boat up there. Kurt drove that, trailered it from Seattle to Schenectady, New York, loaded it on a C-130. And they flew it up to Greenland for us, got it to Thule, and then I think it's still there. Kurt's still using it. He branched off and formed his own NGO and High Arctic Institute, and he's still doing some work in Greenland and using that boat. And so it's project's kind of alive and well, but it's kind of changed direction and paths a little bit. But so that was neat. And the peregrine work was wonderful. The recovery effort in the West, releasing peregrines and getting to watch, part of what I did was, go find Iries. If, we need to document the return of the species. And man, when I went to work for the Peregrine Fund, there were literally in 1988, there were 3 pairs of peregrines nesting in Montana. That's it. And they were all release birds. They were all banded. They were birds we released. So they were truly gone from many states. Some states had a remnant population. Colorado had a few. Oregon, Washington, California, and in the southwest, those areas had some small percentage of what remained. But that was an amazing project, and to do the releases and to set up the release sites, and then get to if that wasn't enough, then try and find wild nesting birds, returning birds nesting, and just sort of lived and breathed peregrines for 7 or 8 or 9 years that I worked on that program, and got to see a lot of wild peregrines hunting and what they do and are capable of at eyries. It's like, wow, if my bird had to live off of white-throated swifts in mountains, she'd starve to death as fast as it took her to starve to death.
Yeah.
And they're really, really good at it. And so that was fun to see all that. And the people I worked with, Ed Levine and Jim Wilmarth and Dan O'Brien and Matt Erickson. There were a bunch of really fun people. There were 4 of us that supervised the hack sites, and we did as many as 28 hack sites scattered around 7 states. So we just kind of roved around and met birds that were either flown to us and then got those into their release sites. We set up release sites, flew hack boxes, built them on cliffs with helicopters, and just really neat stuff. Saw a lot of returning wild peregrines that we had released somewhere the year before. Show up at a hack site. I'll never forget Grays Lake, Idaho, watching this Tiercel peregrine. We released 5 females there, and it was late May. It's a real high mountain valley in eastern Idaho, sort of southeastern Idaho. It was a hack tower. We built a tower on this waterfowl refuge, and it had snowed and it was really cold, and the young peregrines were out and they'd made a few flights. Well, returning a subadult male had showed up, and he had these 5 females there, so he was going to stay for the summer. And I remember, him sitting on the hack box once, and we were all watching with spotting scopes, just watching taking notes on the youngsters and their development and all that. And this Tiercel spotted a snipe that was way, way off in the distance, and it was doing that spring display flight where they go way up in the air and they stoop and they make that neat noise. And this Tiercel went and caught that snipe, and it was an amazing flight. And he made it look pretty easy, but it all happened kind of way up high in the sky. And he made a few stoops, and then climbed again. And then he got on it again and made more stoops, and he caught it, and he had it like 500-600 feet high in the air. And then he brought it back to the hack tower, and he tried to offer it to one of the young females there. But, I just got to see a lot of neat. As a falconer, there is no falconer that would not have loved to see what we got to do and see from those peregrines. And then what a success story. They were delisted, one of the few to ever, be put on the endangered species list by something that we had done, DDT, and then largely been through, falconers' passion for that bird, largely been successfully recovered and restored and come off that list. And number one, it was a unique recovery effort because the one problem was eliminated before we ever released a single bird. DDT was the problem, and that was banned before we ever released a peregrine. And so it allowed this clean environment, at least in Canada and the United States, it was banned. So they had this clean environment now they needed birds put back, but they had a good place to live now. That was the problem. And so they thrived. And that effort in the West sort of started in the early, kind of mid 70s, I guess. Yeah, the releases in Colorado were sort of 75, 76. And as they produced more birds, they branched out to Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and all the other states. And California had their own recovery effort. The guys there, Brian Walton and all his guys, were doing California and a little bit of Nevada and Southern Oregon. And there were falconers doing their own thing in the Midwest. And then, of course, the Peregrine Fund had a recovery effort out of Cornell University and back east, and where we lost the peregrine from east of the Mississippi. They were extirpated, and we lost that bird 100%.
Yeah. So, and while we're on this subject, this is something that, I'm kind of glad that you naturally segued into talking about that a little bit, because that's one thing that anytime I get an opportunity to talk to some of the, the guys that were around, from that era and were kind of either directly or indirectly somewhat involved with that recovery effort and everything, there's always different takes and different kind of opinions and viewpoints on, just how dire the situation really was, if it was mainly the whole species, just the subspecies, or, whatever, they were truly like endangered and, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, having been another person that was kind of directly involved and had a front row seat to all that, I mean, what is your specific take on that? I mean, or at least what is the data, say according to you and stuff? So.
Yeah, no, I think it was extremely dire. I think, like, as I mentioned, DDT number one, that needed to go away, or we probably would have lost them completely. So that was super important. The recovery effort, the release, the reintroductions, I think if nothing else, they speeded up that bird's recovery dramatically. For Montana, a state like Montana, I don't know how many they had historically, but there were a lot of records. There were falconers. John Craighead lived in Missoula. He and his brother, John and Frank, they were really interested, of course, in peregrines, and they had a lot of the historical records for Montana and Idaho and Wyoming. It sort of took a falconer, in the you think of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, who really cared about peregrines? Well, probably if there were falconers around, they were paying attention. Well, and Colonel Luff Meredith, he was the colonel at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls for, I don't know how many years, but a number of years. And a lot of the eyries around the Missouri River drainage were his. I mean, those were his sightings. And anyway, for Montana, certainly they have well over 100 pairs today. They may have well over 200 pairs. When I started in 1988, they had 3. And in just that short a period of time, they did that well. That would have taken a long, long time for that bird to come back to Montana. In my lifetime, the recovery of that, they might have come back. There were a few birds in places, but what does that look like? To have, I think Colorado knew of a handful of pairs in Colorado at its worst, as did California, and who knows, in the Grand Canyon, that's just too big and massive, but they were there. There was a few birds that didn't completely blink out in those states. In the East, it was different. We lost them all. And I think there were 800, I've heard the number of 800 known pairs historically, and that's probably not optimistic. It probably was, well over that prior to DDT, and they lost them all. So that what recovery there would have looked like, because I don't think it could have recovered without reintroductions. So I think it was a no-brainer that, what Tom Cade envisioned, like, we need to do something. That was the smart move, was we need to try and breed these birds, which they were wildly successful at. And it's funny because all those years of falconry, they'd never really been bred in captivity much. There was some folks in Europe that had bred a few in the 40s, maybe a couple more in the 60s, but then really almost nothing. And they didn't have to. I mean, people had access to wild birds, and that's what falconers were using. But when it became necessary, falconers sure did well at it, because other people tried and they didn't even get eggs. Fish and Wildlife Service, they tried to breed some birds, and they were happy to turn that effort over to the Peregrine Fund and whoever else was willing to, breed birds. And, Jim Weaver was super talented at whatever he did, falconry and producing birds in captivity. Tom Cade was really good at rallying the biology and the research side, and, getting before Congress and funding this effort, and then, hiring Bill Burnham in the 70s and having a program in the West to take over that part of the world. But, we didn't lose them all in the West, and recovery would have, at the very best, would have taken so long, just because we were starting from Idaho, and had 0 pairs known. Montana had 0 known pairs. Wyoming had 0 known pairs. It was just an epic loss. Yeah.
Well, and to go along with that, I mean, like I said, people have lots of kind of different viewpoints on, how they kind of would have liked to maybe seen anything maybe done a little differently with the process and things like that too. I mean, would you have, if you could wave a magic wand and go back to some degree, I mean, is there anything that you would have personally changed with the process? Would you have maybe tried to I'm trying to think of how to word this best. Would you maybe have tried to keep certain subspecies with their own like subspecies more and tried to keep rather than just making quote unquote peregrines by any means possible? I mean, if it was possible, I mean, and granted, you would know. You obviously had the front row seat to this, not me. Yeah. But I mean, I don't even know if it would have even been theoretically possible to do so. But I mean, would you have liked to have seen like more anatoms paired with anatoms and then reintroduced, as opposed to just making just peregrines, in general? Or I mean, what's your opinion on that?
And in the West, we did have to do that. That's something I've been asked by falconers before. Is like, well, they're kind of mongrels, and well, actually, no, they're not. In the West, we were bound by the Fish and Wildlife Service. If there is a remaining subspecies, that's the subspecies that has to be put back there. And since there were remaining birds in the Western U.S., the Peregrine Fund, through donations of falconers that had anatoms at the time, like Tom Smiley, Frank Bond, Ed Freinmuth, I think, had a few. Whatever anatoms people had, they donated to the Peregrine Fund. Plus, the Peregrine Fund got permits to pull some wild birds, and even over the course of in my career, add to that genetic base over the course. I mean, anytime they felt we should add some birds to the captive flock, they were able to do that through special permits from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they had a pretty diverse source of genetics. I mean, they had, I heard, birds from Colorado, from New Mexico, from California, from Montana, from Wyoming. And so they had these, Jim Anderson had a bird that he trapped at an eyrie in Wyoming, and she, Dan Conkle talked about her name was Lil, and he said, wow, that bird was she's kind of a passage bird. He trapped her in August, but she was a really good breeder, and they were successful at producing a lot of young from her. So in the West, the only thing we could release were the indigenous, the anatom that came from there. In the East, since there was nothing left, we're starting from nothing, there were various subspecies released there. It was kind of that or nothing. And so, and we didn't have a lot of peregrines to pick from. The Eastern anatom was gone. And it sounds like was its own thing. I mean, like maybe one of the biggest, if not the biggest race of peregrine.
I've heard that as well.
Yeah. And, I've looked at study skins. That really interests me. And I've looked at study skins, and boy, Pete, Jenny, and I, when we're in New York City, when we were fundraising back there, we'd go, let's kill some time and go to the Natural History Museum. And of course, we'd go right to the peregrines and look at these birds that were taken in the 30s and 40s. And to me, they looked huge. I mean, it's a study skin, but their feathers are wide, their feet are huge. They look like a big, peel's looking, but an anatom version of a big, maybe even a large peel. So what a bird to have lost. And, I've heard Bob Berry, the rumor, and I don't think it's a rumor, that he had the last of the Eastern production in his hand once at an eyrie, and just put them back in the eyrie. Not that it, would have mattered. It was just 3 birds or something like that. But to have seen that and had them in your hands, what a thing. And I think that was in the 60s. And I think it was the last pair that was known to have been productive. And then they were gone. So in the East, there were, various subspecies, anatoms, there were tundra peregrines, there were Peel's peregrines, and there were some others released in the East. And, over the years, it will probably genetically just turn into a bird that works well, whatever that will be. And it is. I mean, they're doing very well back there now. So, but we didn't have much of the reintroduction efforts back there. It was sort of that or nothing. So let's get peregrines back. And with, the other species that we work with, the Oplomato falcon, the only bird we can put back in the United States is the northern Oplomato. We can't release the birds from Chile or Argentina, which is a different subspecies. And that's what the falconers, in this country are flying. They have that subspecies. They look a little bit different, but they're obviously Oplomatos. But we are bound. We collected our birds from Mexico and from the northern Aplomado falcon, and that's so we need to put them back, and we should, because they're available.
Gotcha.
It took some work to get those permits, but Pete Jenny was able to do that, and in 88, 87 and 88, that was the first thing I ever did for the Peregrine Fund, was to go down there and collect some of the breeders for the Aplomado program. And Tom Cade and Granger Hunt they had an interest in that species long time ago. In this, it was in the early 70s. Those two went to Mexico and collected some birds. And Granger at that time was actually the director of the Chihuahuan Desert Research Institute, which is in Alpine, Texas. And he was a professor at the Sul Ross University there as well. And they actually, Granger and his team were the first to breed Aplomados in captivity in this country. Eventually, Granger donated all those birds, the birds they collected, plus the young they had raised, to Brian Walton at Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group. They were doing the peregrine reintroduction in California, and then they were further successful at producing more young. They actually did a sort of a pilot study, and they over the course of, I think, 5 years in the mid 80s, they released 24 young in South Texas, and they had good success. And as sort of a paving the way to, the Peregrine Fund was asked, would you be willing to undertake a recovery effort for the Aplomado falcon, similar to the peregrine effort, captive propagation and releases, because the Aplomado was listed as an endangered species in this country in 1990. And so they were sort of bound to do something, the Fish and Wildlife Service, about that. And they came to us. And anyway, Brian Walton gave all his birds to the Peregrine Fund. So they went from Granger to Brian Walton. Brian Walton had success further, and then he gave those birds to the Peregrine Fund. Pete Jenny took over the program and knew we needed more, and genetic diversity, and just more birds in captivity to truly, build the captive flock so we could release 70, 80, 90, 100 a year. We released, I think, 180 on a year or two. And so Pete got permits from Mexico in 87 and 88.
All that stuff that you just kind of talked about, outlined, clarified, that's all a big reason why I'm always excited to talk to guys like yourself that had more of a direct, hands-on, front row seat to a lot of these programs and a lot of these efforts that have been done. Because everything else you hear from everybody else in a lot of ways is in a big way purely speculative. Sure. I mean, sure, they might have heard from someone or from whatever that was involved or whatever, but that's why I like talking, straight to getting straight to the source, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, with a lot of these guys that dealt directly with this stuff, because there's still a lot of, for as many years as passed since all that stuff happened, now there's still so much mystique in regards to a lot of these things. So
no, it was an amazing effort, and that one which falconers played such a huge part in, and it was nice to be asked by the agency that was skeptical of falconry. It was a good thing, and I think it was a good time. The Peregrine Fund and some of those folks, they gave a lot of credibility to falconry at a time when, in those agencies, there may not have been. And all of a sudden, these people are helping, and they're doing a good thing. They're doing basically our work and restoring an endangered species. And, it was pretty charismatic people that were involved with that program, not just the Peregrine Fund, but many the Canadian program and the private sector of that, but certainly the Peregrine Fund and its board, they were really taken seriously. And Tom Cade and Jim Weaver and Frank Bond and Jim Anderson, very charismatic people. Bob Berry. The founding board members, Bill Burnham, they gave a lot of credibility to falconry because that was their passion, and these people saw that as, wow, these are falconers, and these people can speak and they can talk, and they were wanting to do these good things and the right thing for raptors, and so that, I think, it was good. Besides just recovering the peregrine, that was sort of a byproduct of all that as well. But and then of course the Peregrine Fund went on to, do we stop here, or or do we go on? And the decision was made to continue on with. There's a lot to be done. And California condors, that's another bird that I've worked with quite a bit over the years, and amazing project, and a pretty neat bird to spend time with. And we're doing the recovery effort in Arizona, in the sort of the Grand Canyon, and other people are tasked with the historical habitat in California, other programs, but neat project too.
Yeah.
Just kind of exactly what the Peregrine Fund does, captive propagation and reintroduction. And that's the captive propagation is, if anything, put the Peregrine Fund on the map. That was it. And then being very good at the evolution and of release techniques. We think we can do this. It's a different species. We'll just probably need to evolve a little bit, some of the techniques, but we'll figure that out. And it's always seemed to, but no end to challenges.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's another thing that I always like talking to people about that have been involved in some of these different organizations, whether as in a volunteer capacity or, an actual official employee or whatever. You can't ever emphasize enough to people just how much work goes into all these different efforts, and somebody's got to do it, because otherwise we wouldn't have anything what we have.
Yeah, so. It's they're neat programs, they're neat projects. It's neat to give something back. I'd like to work with grouse when I retire. I'm as passionate about grouse as I am peregrines. Mm-hmm. I mean, the quarry we hunt, and not just grouse. I mean, it's waterfowl. I love everything that we are all about. And the quarry is so important, but the biology of prairie grouse and how they live, and they're a native bird that has evolved, grew up with the raptors that we love to fly at them, and the country that we love to fly birds in. We'd be nothing without that. And I want to do something for those places too. And I hope to do that at some point, work with sage grouse and sharp-tailed grouse and habitat, and that really interests me.
Well, I mean, you certainly need something else on your plate. Yeah. You definitely don't have enough going on right now, and you look like you're a pretty bored individual, like you need to just take on at least 3 or 4 other things too. Yeah. So,
you bet.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm glad we got a chance to touch on all those different things. I mean, it was definitely on kind of my sort of list or agenda, discuss some of that stuff a little bit. I mean, you've shared so many really, really cool things and aspects of your history, and I know we could probably sit here the rest of the day and hash a lot of those out, but I do want to go ahead and circle back to some of your personal falconry and things like that again. And I mean, this would be a good time. I mean, you've already shared a lot of amazing experiences and stories, but in regards to like your own personal falconry, I mean, out of all the years that you've been doing this, I know it's a hard ask for a lot of people, but I mean, what's one of the most memorable hunting experiences, flights, or just memories that you have with, like one of your, there's always at least one top-notch flight or experience that someone has, even after so many decades of practicing, like yourself.
Absolutely. So. No, there's some that stick out. We could talk for a day on that, but I think just rolling some conservation into it as well. The Peregrine Fund gave me a bird once that was a peregrine that wound up in a rehab facility somewhere in Portland, Oregon. It's a bird that we actually released 6 years prior to that. So this bird had been out for a long time. She was released in the Columbia River Gorge from one of our hack sites. She was shot on the Oregon coast and had a broken wing and maybe some other injuries. She went to a rehabber, and then what we were going to do is take her back as a rehabbed bird when this rehabber felt they were ready, and put her back at her exact same hack site where she was released. It was still in operation. We had young there that year, and they were going to be released and flown. So we would introduce her after those had been released, put her in the hack box, hold her for just an hour maybe, and let her go at her old hack site. Didn't really know what to do with her, but thought that and we had used that, employed that before, and it worked. Well, Bill Heinrich and I think he was a state law enforcement, and a biologist, state Oregon biologist went to get that bird, and she was a disaster. And she was broken up. A lot of feathers were broken. That rehabber had pulled feathers out of her with pliers hoping that they would grow back, some of which did, two of which never did. She had a tail feather and a primary, which never, I don't think they're ever going to grow back. So that, the plan to release her was, of course, out of the question. And they took her from the rehabber and brought her back to the Peregrine Fund. And the Peregrine Fund housed her in one of our breeding chambers alone. And she lived all of that summer, and molted. And that winter, Bill Burnham said, look, this bird needs to be flown. She sat for over a year with injuries. To give her a chance, she needs to be flown. And would you be interested in it? And I said, of course, and get a chance to fly a haggard peregrine. And I thought it was a neat thing, to do for this bird that had a rough life there for a while. And so I think I got her in November or December. I got her, and she had done molting. She had molted pretty well, except those two feathers were never going to come back in. And I was finishing college then. I think this was like 1990 or 91, and I was back in Missoula. And so, this bird was in perfect plumage now, except for her two feathers missing, but horrible condition. She just hadn't done anything in so long, and she had these injuries. She'd probably really atrophied. And I was trying to call her on a creance, 10, 20 feet to me, and she'd fly 5 feet and then walk to me. And boy, this is going to be a long road. And I just pursued that, and she got a little better, and she got a little better. And a month went by, and 2 months went by. And finally she got really strong, or pretty strong, and strong enough that I lost her one night. She actually I was just trying to throw her a bag, and she checked at some field feeding mallards and wound up late in the evening in the airport property, and I couldn't get her back. And the next day, I had the signal through the night. The next morning, it was gone. I had to get an airplane and fly for her, and I found her, went back and got her, and I got her back. And anyway, I wound up being able to fly that bird, and under a special permit that I could hunt waterfowl, and out of the waterfowl season, to prepare this bird to be released. And so I flew her, I think, into all of March and barely into April. And it was nice then. It was time to let her go. And she caught a lot of game. I flew her almost exclusively ducks and some bags. She caught some pigeons and things. But she was a spectacular duck hawk. When she came, as soon as she got strong, she was where you hoped, an eye or something might be in 3 or 4 years. She was just like absolutely spectacular. And it was funny because if I was flying her near water creeks, I was flying her on spring creeks and big ponds and lakes. I was really challenging her and making her fly hard. I was even taking her first kill from her and making her catch another one. I did things I would never do to my own birds. And I didn't really want her to like people. But she was a super nice bird. She was surprisingly, with all that, horrific care, she was amazingly tame. And so I need to make her a little bit wilder if I can. And it didn't really seem to matter, but she'd catch a duck and we'd go again, and she'd catch another duck. And finally it got time to let her go. And I called Bill Heinrich and I said, well, I'd like to let her go in Montana. Can I just let her go where I've been flying her, up in the Flathead Valley? And he said, yeah, I think you can let her go wherever you want to. He said, but I would include just some law enforcement people if you can arrange that, and let's band her. And so they sent me a band, the Peregrine Fund did. And I actually had the ornithology professor from the university band her. So that was official. And then I had someone from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They were the law enforcement at the bison range north of Missoula. It's a Fish and Wildlife Service managed property, and they had bison and a big enclosure that is a pretty cool place. And so one of those folks joined me, and then someone from the state joined me, and we let this bird go on a waterfowl refuge at Nine Pipes. And I thought, I still am worried about her. She's truly to be on her own. So I'm going to put a transmitter on her that will come off her tail when she loses her tail feather. And so I put a transmitter on her and thought, well, I'll follow her around if I can. And we let her go. It's funny because the Fish and Wildlife Service fellow asked me, he said, well, how about all these gulls? He said, these things are really hard on the ducks here. I said, would you think she'll kill a gull? And I said, yeah, she might. I mean, maybe eventually she might kill gulls. She's not going to control the population, but I said, she flies. I hunt with this bird at like 30 ounces, and she's 38 ounces today when I'm letting her go. Plus, I fed her before I let her go while we were all standing there with her. She was eating, and then just held her up, and off she went. And she went out and sat in a tree on one of these little islands in this waterfowl refuge, and that was kind of the end of it. And we sat and watched for a while, and then we all went home. Well, the very next day, Dale and I went back up there to find her, and we get a signal, and we track her down, and she's out on one of these islands on this waterfowl refuge. And we have to wade across a little channel. The water was down from the winter and the spring, and so we wade across this channel, get all muddy. And here she is on this island. She's plucking a ring-billed gull. She killed the very first thing she killed was a seagull. And so that was really neat, though. I think over the course of the next 2 weeks, we tracked her down up to 14 days later after letting her go and found her on that gull. We found her on a drake redhead, found her on a coot, and we found her on something else. So, I mean, this bird was like having no problem and catching game. And it was really neat, to have that transmitter on her and be able to follow her around. And then I think things got busy with school. It was, by now it was May. I think school was winding down, so we were taking finals. So there was a period of time we didn't go up and look for her. And then when we did go back, I didn't have a signal, but I'm sure the transmitter just dropped off or was dead by then. But I felt like it was all we could do for her, to get her there. She hunted hard, and she was a super, super good bird, a great duck hawk. And then the only peregrine I've ever actually flown and let go was her. And she had to be. I mean, she couldn't be my bird. She was just on loan to be rehabbed and properly. But that was neat. It was a neat experience, and it was fun to fly a bird that was a true, what that bird had done in her life. She probably, certainly had raised babies in her life and hunted and done a lot that, but she was spectacular. Just out of the gate. Once she got strong, look out.
Well, I mean, the irony in all that is, I've talked to a few other falconers that have helped rehab and have gotten to do the same thing. And they said that by far and away, the best and easiest birds that they ever dealt with as far as that goes were haggard peregrines. Is that right? Because, basically they said that it was so easy. Like once they were able to actually get them healed back up, I mean, all they really had to do was go out a couple times, toss a couple pigeons, and they were taking game on their own. So it's interesting that you said that, but I mean that's great though. I mean, especially someone with your background being able to be a part of something and come full circle, and combine all the different aspects of what you love the most about it all. I can't imagine how rewarding that was.
That was neat. It's neat to let a bird go now and then. I mean, I don't fly many passage birds. I know the guys that do let them go. I flew a gyrfalcon once, and I knew the day I got her that it wasn't a bird I was going to be able to keep and molt, and I didn't really want to. I'd done that before, and it's a challenge. I mean, I never had one ever have a sick day in its life, a passage gyr, but it always made me nervous. And I knew I was going to be traveling for work come spring and summer. So enjoy this bird, fly it hard, and then let her go as soon as this Montana season ends, the end of March. And so I flew her about a month and a half, and she caught lots of stuff. Really a wonderful bird, kind of a small, light female, not a white bird, but just a light gray or kind of a dark silver. Real pretty bird. Gerald Geiger trapped her in Missoula when he was out flying as peregrine, caught her, and do you want her? I have, of course I want her. So that was fun. It was fun to fly her. And it was neat. I never lost her. She never spent a moment out, she real, solid that way. But the day I let her go, same place, I took her right back where I let that peregrine go and fed her up. She was, super heavy. And she left climbed all the way across the lake turned around, came back, climbed over me, and was pretty high. I mean, it's very, very high, and you could see her. And then she turned north and flew out of sight. So it was pretty rewarding to I think that bird knows exactly where she's from, and she's going back there. But no, it's kind of neat to have those experiences, and either that or keep one a long, long time. I've had a couple I've flown for a long time, 17, 18 years, and they died of old age. That black jerkin of mine, Tar Baby, he died at, I think, 25 years old, or just short of 25. And I flew him 5 years, and I gave him to Dan, and Dan had him as a semen donor, and I think probably raised hundreds of birds from him, mostly Jers, but some hybrids, and some other folks, Kenny Sterner and Pete Widener made some hybrids from him. But so it was a wonderful bird. He was the best grouse hawk I ever flew. He actually made grouse look pretty easy, and he flew spectacular. And everything he did in his life the personality was a perfect 10, and he's just wonderful through his whole life. And he was a good breeder. His Dan said, man, he's a semen donor like a peregrine. He really is solid. I mean, and he was a tremendous falconry bird. So yeah, it's neat. Neat bird.
Very cool. Yeah. I mean, you're probably one of the few guys that I've talked to on the podcast now that's had kind of a wide variety to this extent of kind of like exceptions, when it comes to, you're one of the few guys that I've talked to that's had a bird over 20 years and then gotten to do all these crazy things. And it's been a real pleasure getting a chance to talk to you about all of them. And I appreciate it. But I mean, we probably need to go ahead and start kind of wrapping this up a bit. So before we end though, I do want to go ahead and end with you like I have with so many others and get kind of like one of your, I don't know, better pieces of advice, sentiment, whatever, and all the years that you've been practicing falconry and then doing, conservation as far as a biologist and all these other things. I mean, what would be one of your biggest pieces of advice to current and future generations of falconers? And we can go ahead and wrap this up.
You bet. Well, I think what we talked about a little bit earlier, just, the evolution, it's like, don't be pressured to think my falcon has to fly at 1,000 feet, or my hawk has to do this. You need to enjoy your bird, and you don't need to set a goal and I need to catch 100 head of game to be relevant in this world. You don't need to do that. What you need to do is enjoy your birds, enjoy your dogs, and the country that we get to hunt in. Things are changing, and just evolve, I think, and make the most of it, and refine your equipment, and appreciate the quarry. Never take that for granted. I think those sorts of things.
Perfect.
Perfect.
No, I think that's a good note to end on. And like I said, thank you again so much. And no, I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, we got to constantly adapt and have to learn to temper our own expectations of ourselves and of whatever bird we're flying. And not to say it's not okay to try and push the limits and see what you can get your bird to do and stuff. But yeah, everybody needs to worry more about living by their own standards versus what other people think, and I mean, like I said, it's a great note to end on. And thanks again so much for taking the time and doing this and once again helping put all this together. It's been a real pleasure. And I mean, like I said, hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again at some point and maybe go into more depth with some of these other cool things that you've done. And that's my biggest kind of burden or cross to bear in doing that. I always hate feeling like there's never going to be enough time, and we're never going to even be able to scratch the surface on so many people's falconry and stuff. But,
I think you're going to enjoy the other Sheridan folks that you're going to talk to. They're certainly all of my mentors and super people. So yeah, that's going to be neat.
Yeah, the rest of the week's going, or at least the next couple of days anyway, is going to be pretty cool. And I'm looking forward to it, just like I was looking forward to this.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. No, thank you, John. That was great.
No, thank you, Brian. Yeah, appreciate you. And let's talk about either lunch or something else here shortly.
You bet.
All right.